Good morning, y'all, and welcome. I'm Laurens Cyrillus. I'm the cybersecurity editor and deputy tech editor at Politico here in Europe, based in Brussels. And I have the pleasure of welcoming Marcel de Groot, CEO of Vodafone Germany, for what is the first interview of this Competitiveness Competitiveness Europe Week. Obviously, when we talk about competitiveness, one of the first words that come to mind is, digital. Digitization, innovation. A lot of people see digital as sort of the way to make sure that industries innovate and that they jump to the next level. And that is what Europe is looking at when they talk about competitiveness and competing with other regions in the world. It's also one of the areas where Europe has had to realize that it has had issues and troubles and that it needs to speed up in order to be able to compete across the world. And so that's what we're going to be talking about in the coming 15 minutes with our distinguished guests. I just want to mention that if you want to discuss this event, if you want to exchange ideas, there's always this beautiful social media network called X, where you can use the hashtag Politico Competitive Week. There's also other social media networks that have recently gained in popularity. You can also use those. So maybe, Marcel, if you want, if you can, let us start with sort of your perspective and where you come from. Because obviously Germany, Europe's biggest national market, and also known for having a very strong manufacturing base, very strong industrial base, not necessarily known for having the best digital infrastructure or having sped up or having rolled out the quickest sort of new generations of digital networks. Would you say this is what's going to be holding Germany back, and how do you fix it?
Well, when you ask me where you come from, the first thinking is I'm Dutch, right? But you of course refer to the fact that I'm working in Germany since 2 years now. And I think if we look at infrastructure, if we look at digital infrastructure, we cannot underestimate the importance it has, right? It's basically the mother of innovation, and it always has been. If you go back to the Roman period, the roads as an infrastructure were driving innovation. When we went back to the US, when the Wild West period was there, basically the railways were driving innovation. Not always for the better. But if you look at it today, the infrastructure and in Europe, but also I would say in Germany, is very critical for innovation. And that infrastructure, without that infrastructure, there's no self-driving car, there's no connected car, there is no iPhone that doesn't work, there's no e-government. All of these things that we got used to in the last, let's say, 1 or 2 decades have evolved on the back of a great infrastructure. And going back to your question, yes, I would say in Germany, Germany is the 3rd largest economy in the world. It's recently surpassed Japan, and it's a magnificent country with high quality standards, producing world's finest goods, right? And I do think that there is an opportunity for the German companies, the German industry, to digitize better. And that's not just for core industry, right? And there are great examples, for example, with BASF, which is a super important company for production in Europe, or Skoda, where we use technology to make sure that they do things better. So there are also a lot of examples where we see that especially big industry is doing well with these campus nets and autonomous parking in production facilities, etc. But if I go back, and I think the German economy is one that, like a lot of countries in Europe, but specifically in Germany, it is an economy that is thriving on small and medium enterprises. That there is something about small and medium enterprises that in Europe, about 100 million people are employed in small and medium enterprises. And that's exactly where I think there is a real opportunity. And we know for SMEs that are well connected, that are well digitized, that they have on average 26% higher revenue profile. So people do understand that this is important, but at the same time, it is something where in Germany, we as an industry, and particularly Vodafone, is putting a lot of time and effort in because it's super, super important. So we're investing 250 million in that space. We hire staff, and we make sure that we protect also, and we see it as a big duty, protect the Mittelstand, as they call it in Germany, from cybersecurity, but that we give them opportunities with cloud and hosting, that we help them with their ESG reporting. So super, super important.
So this was one of the things I wanted to get to, because telecom operators for a long time now have also presented themselves as sort of, Europe's strong competitors, sort of, Europe's strong digital companies that have the ability to compete, but have long complained that competing with, for instance, US big tech giants who became great on software mostly, that it's been difficult, and that competition has been difficult. My question is, do you see the telecom operators as Europe's next giants that compete globally, or do you see them as, your role being provide the infrastructure so that the smaller companies, the startups, the ones that can scale up, that those become Europe's sort of competitive advantage across the world?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. And I think if you look at startups, we're quite good in producing startups, but we're not pretty good at keeping them, right? So we see, and that's also from the Draghi, we see that like 30% at a certain moment in time of all of the startups, the tech startups that are successful in Europe, in the end are not longer in the territory. And I think there's a couple of fundamental problems there. The first one is compared to the situation in China and the US. In China, you have 4 networks. In the US, you have 3 networks. You have 1 regulator in that country. And we have 27 regulators across the European footprint that have all their ways in dealing about things. That is not making exactly things more easy. The second thing I would say is the investment that is needed to push and to make sure that these companies can be successful. And there was a third one that just left my brain.
Those are 2 big ones, so I think that's fine. Maybe on the first one, so the issue of whether telecom companies can merge and can acquire smaller rivals within Europe. You mentioned former Prime Minister of Italy, Mario Draghi's report, which mentions this as one of the pain points. Yes. At the same time, from a consumer perspective and also a customer perspective, the B2B services that customers take from telecom operators, the deal hasn't been that bad if you compare it across with other regions in the world. So why should Europe change its approach here?
Well, I think what would really do Europe a massive favor is we basically, just like the other territories, go more to a situation where we treat it as one, right? And all of the and I think the regulators done what they had to do, but I think we have come to a situation where we basically look at each and every single market, where the biggest competitors in the world are looking at a much bigger market. And for companies, infrastructure players like ours, it is important to have scale, right? And the average company in Europe has like 4 million subscribers. I don't have to explain to you that if you have 3 or 4 operators in the US and China, how many subscribers they have. So scale is super, super important. And in-market consolidation is something that you see happening, but it's always coming with quite a bit of resistance and think, is this right? We need to have 4 operators. I doubt, right? And I think we need to go to in-market consolidation and preferably even look beyond the boundaries of the European nations and look at a consolidation across Europe, which I think will make Europe benefit from it because you create a better investment climate. And if we look at telecoms, yes, we have been enabling quite a lot, but it's basically from a pricing perspective a race to the bottom. So it is time to change, and as pointed out by the report, to create a climate and an investment climate when it comes to spectrum, right? We talk a lot about that. I'd 10 times rather spend money on building better networks. And I think the recent decisions by the German regulator are really good because then we can build more network into the country.
Let's get into investment then, which you touch upon. Maybe one of the stories that I've covered in past years was the sort of the promise and rollout of 5G, which started very active. There was a very big push, and this was sort of the buzzword that was attracting investment back to the sector. When we look at it a couple of years after, it's been a mixed success, I think, it's fair to say. My question is, one, to what extent do you still count on 5G as a technology to attract investment? And secondly, what are the next phases of investment that you're looking at? What is going to bring in this investment?
Listen, I think 5G is a pretty important driver. It's super important for especially 5G standalone for the enablement, for example, of autonomous driving cars, etc. And I think that cycle is going to an end, and of course new technology is coming. But I think we should not underestimate the power of fixed infrastructure, and that fixed infrastructure for Europe is super critical to business success. So mobile is one thing, but fixed, now that we see an opportunity to basically phase out copper in Europe by 2030 is the idea. And that's an important step. It's a super important milestone that the gigabit speeds are brought to each and every single home in Europe, and not just homes, but also businesses. That will drive a lot of innovation. We just need to be careful with that, because if we do things like that when we change from copper to fiber, or from copper to gigabit netzen, that was German, that we do that in a super open and transparent way, basically driving competition into the new era. And one thing I'm afraid of, specifically in Germany, is that we recreate a monopoly in fixed. But I think, back to your question, there's mobile, there's fixed, and for us, as an infrastructure provider, the two go really, really hand in hand, right? And we combine them wherever we can. And you see for businesses, and you see also for households, these things, they belong, they're one package, and they drive prosperity and they drive economic growth.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that was mentioned at the end of our last panel by panelist Christina Cafara, coming from a competition perspective, was Europe's question on dependency, right? I think she expressed it as, we have a risk of becoming a colony. And so, I mean, this has been an issue that's heavily impacted Europe's telecom sector, including in discussion about vendors and supply chains and discussion on high-risk vendors. My question here is, what do you make of that analysis? And do you think, how if the analysis is Europe is at risk or is dependent on foreign regions, to what extent is that holding us back, or to what extent should we allow for a certain level?
Thank you for asking this question, because this was exactly what left my brain before. No, I think that there's a real need to look at the policy when it comes to competition, and we need to be treated in an equal fashion. And that means that one service cannot be different. If you're a telecoms operator and then you're a big tech company, you fall under a different regime. That is not fair, right? So we need to protect what we have, and I wholeheartedly agreed with the statement she made at the end. And I think we as an industry, we need, and as Europe, we need to look at how we define competition and create a level playing field, so to say, level playing field, to make sure that our infrastructure is supporting the growth of the economy. And as pointed out, right, by the report, it is a critical driver to make sure that we're successful. And I worked for Vodafone for 16 years already. I just left the Netherlands to work for a secondment in Ireland. And at that moment in time, the Dutch network had an issue in a data center and it burned down, right? For 3 days, the network wasn't working. Only then you realize how important the digital infrastructure is, because the government could not communicate, trains and trams weren't driving. So it's a silent force that enables quite a bit of power in the economy to the actual citizens of Europe. So I think it's super, super important, and we need to protect that.
Luckily, it happened just when you were in Ireland.
Yeah. There's always something happening, I'll tell you that. But not like that. Yeah.
If we go back to the question on dependencies, one of the areas where there's been a great dependency is in cloud. And this is something that, you have a close relationship, obviously, with cloud providers.
Yes.
But in cloud, it is crystal clear that there is a heavy dependency on other regions. Is it still sort of, is it still realistic to expect that Europe can win back?
Of course. And I think we should always look at the glass half full instead of half empty. And it's never too late, right? Because the way things are developing in Europe and the way things are developing in technology, I think, we have been a bit sleeping at the wheel at a couple of instances and have been over-regulated and have not done what we should have done. But it's never too late. And I think if we change the switch now and we basically control our own destiny, I think we have a very prosperous future, and I'm happy to be in Europe.
Let me quickly close it with the last question, which is AI keeps coming up as sort of the new technology that's going to be driving innovation. That's going to be, again, there, Europe has its champions, but it's also competing with very strong companies across the world. Purely from a digital infrastructure perspective, do you feel Europe currently has the networks and the infrastructure in place to enable AI?
Well, we certainly have, and we will keep on investing. And I think both for upstream and downstream, we are modeling what does that mean for capacity, and we're looking at that very, very thoroughly and make sure that all of our customers in Germany and the rest of Europe and in Africa can do whatever is required to stay connected and to connect for a better future. That's where we are.
Great. I'll close it there. Marcel, thank you. Thank you
Thank you very much.
Now we're going into a short networking break that's taking place just outside here. We've got nibbles, we've got coffee, we've got everything. And it's a good moment to just interact, talk to people, and get a feel. We'll be back at 1:35 with a spotlight discussion on the green gold rush. And I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
United in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
If we do not renew our partnerships with the rest of the world, Europe will not be relevant.
We can make it if we are together as Europeans.
Do you genuinely believe that countries will manage to reach these very ambitious targets?